Kannst ausmachen jetzt.
Shelley Carabell and Neil Lundy.
Despite the worldwide crackdown on narcotics, drug sales still flourish in cities like Amsterdam.
Amsterdam has a major problem because its reputation for tolerance of soft drugs has attracted hard drug users and dealers. But as drug-related crime grows, the city's tolerance is wearing thin. Walt Christophersen reports.
Stepping off the train at Amsterdam Central Station, chances are you'll catch a whiff of marijuana before you reach the street. Amsterdam has been known as the drug mecca of Europe since 1976, when the government lowered the penalties for soft drugs. Over the years, hundreds of so-called coffee shops opened up, selling small quantities of marijuana and hashish. Even though soft drugs are technically illegal, the government realized they can't be eliminated, so why not permit limited use? The problem was that Amsterdam's liberal reputation attracted hard drug users. Sales of heroin and cocaine became more brazen despite harsh penalties. Many addicts turned to robbery and assault to finance their habit, and crime went up. Although the police say the crime rate has stabilized, it isn't low enough for the people who live in Amsterdam. Their well-known tolerance is wearing thin. Amsterdam residents have learned to leave nothing in their cars for fear of tempting thieves. Nevertheless, addicts break the windows to steal radios. The owner of a large Amsterdam auto glass company told us he replaced 10,000 windows last year, half caused by break-ins. One customer was having a window installed after losing his radio. Has that changed his attitude?
Well, this is the first time this sort of crime is happening to me. So it's changing a bit, yeah. I'm getting less, tolerant about it. And I think something has to go, has to be done about it.
Shopkeepers in this high-crime area have done something about it. They broadcast a warning over a loudspeaker telling shoppers to watch out for pickpockets.
That will give pickpockets the chance to get hold of your wallet and valuables.
They even hired 2 guards to chase away undesirable characters.
2 or 3 years ago, we had on the bridge here in the street about 40, 50, 60 people. Dealing drugs, using drugs, and so on. And at the moment we started with the guards, they disappeared over there. You don't solve the problem, it's just they go to another place.
A woman who lives on the same street says the people used to feel sorry for the addicts. Now they're irritated by them.
I'll say 10 years ago, there was a much more liberal attitude.
Yeah, everything was possible. And freedom was the biggest word we got. But then, whose freedom is it? Freedom of this small group of junks? Or the freedom of the people that live here and that want to walk alone in the streets at night and I don't want to have 10 locks on their doors?
Reacting to the growing discontent, authorities have been getting tougher, shutting down shops where hard drugs are sold, deporting foreign drug offenders, and strictly enforcing soft drug laws.
People are afraid, and we are afraid that they don't come here. Yeah. Especially tourists. We need a tourist here in this part of Amsterdam.
Further action is expected as more people say no to drug-related crime. Walt Christophersen, European Journal, Amsterdam.
There are hundreds of
countries called on Iran and Iraq to respect the 1925 Geneva Accord, which banned the use of chemical weapons. This has given new impetus to a disarmament conference in Geneva, where many nations are trying to reach agreement to ban such chemical weapons. Walt Christophersen reports.
The first and only significant use of chemical weapons in the form of poison gas was in World War I, when even army horses were equipped with gas masks for protection. Soldiers hurled chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gases at each other, hoping to incapacitate the enemy with burns, nausea, or choking fits. Despite the later development of far more deadly agents such as nerve gas, chemical weapons were not used in World War II. There were 2 main reasons for this prudent attitude: an international revulsion against gas warfare and its limited effectiveness on the battlefield. The United States stopped making chemical weapons in 1969, then started up again last December, manufacturing chemical artillery shells. These state-of-the-art weapons are called binaries because they contain separated chemicals which become lethal only when mixed. The U.S. is also developing a binary rocket warhead and a chemical bomb called Big Eye.
We have watched the Soviet arsenal grow and grow over the past 20 years and have conducted negotiations in good faith, but we're forced to, our country is forced to, because of national security concerns, to modernize our own stockpile.
The United States' position is that its renewed manufacture of chemical weapons should not have an adverse effect on the disarmament conference here in Geneva. In fact, U.S. officials note that the Soviets have become more serious about a chemical weapons ban since production started. Reaching a worldwide accord on chemical weapons is currently the top priority of the Disarmament Conference, a 40-nation negotiating body. Last year's agreement on intermediate-range nuclear missiles raised hopes here.
The atmosphere is much better since there are new developments in the disarmament field, which was not the case for years. I feel that the whole development aids and helps the Convention on Chemical Weapons.
However, despite breakthroughs on verification procedures for the removal of nuclear weapons, chemical weapons are a different story.
Concealment is very easy. Deception is very easy in the area of chemical weapons, whereas in INF you do have greater opportunity for satellite photography, and missiles are bigger objects.
Another complicating factor is that chemical weapons have been used recently by Iraq in the Gulf War. Some 15 to 20 nations besides the United States and the Soviet Union have chemical weapons, and this multiplies the difficulties of treaty acceptance and compliance. Arms negotiators are still optimistic about reaching an agreement soon, but soon probably means next year. Walt Christophersen, European Journal, Geneva.
Increasing
In the last few years, there's been a huge upsurge in the number of East Bloc citizens abandoning their native lands to start a new life in the West. But the transition is often difficult for the people used to living in a communist system. Walt Christophersen reports that having freedom is one thing, learning to be free is another.
East Germans have been coming to the West ever since Germany was divided shortly after the war. Between 1949 and 1961, some 3.5 million crossed over. These people are headed for a processing center in Gießen, West Germany. Slowing down the flow of refugees was the reason East Germany built the Berlin Wall in 1961. But the people are still coming. Nearly 600,000 have emigrated or escaped since '61. We tend to assume that after someone emigrates or escapes from the East, his problems are over. But living in the West requires some adjustment. And for some people, it's not easy. In West Berlin, the first stop for most East Germans is a dormitory such as this, run by Protestant churches and financed by the city. They usually stay 4 or 5 months while trying to get situated. Around 140 people, both families and individuals, live here at any one time. Newcomers say one thing that amazes them is the wide variety of consumer goods available, especially in supermarkets. They also like the fact that they can travel and say what they think without fear of arrest. This woman emigrated to West Berlin with her husband and 2 sons because they wanted to open their own restaurant in the East and couldn't get permission to do it. It's important, they say, to decide your own future. Project Director Thomas Sauer told us the refugees are very enthusiastic at first, but their optimism is mixed with anxiety because of all the decisions they face. He says nearly everyone has second thoughts about having come here. Angela Modler has been in West Berlin since last summer, but she says she still feels as if she has one foot in the East.
We who have been brought up and educated in the East are used to having our lives organized for us and not being responsible for ourselves. In this context, life here is certainly different, and there is some stress.
I'm speaking to you.
Dr. Rainer Kaderbach, a psychiatrist, told us 10% of the immigrants have trouble adjusting and require clinical treatment for stress. Life is so different here that night school classes are offered to acquaint the immigrants with everyday situations. This class is dealing with credit and insurance. Buying on credit is unheard of in East Germany, and insurance is provided by the government. But despite the adjustments and stress, the people we talked with said they came to the West seeking freedom, and they found it.
It's very depressing when you're standing in front of the wall and crying, knowing you can't take that little step across. When I came to the West, it gave me a great feeling of happiness.
Walt Christophersen, European Journal, Berlin.
From Cologne, West Germany, ETS presents European Journal with your hosts Jeannie Hingsen and Rex Ellis. The following program was made possible in part by a grant from Lufthansa German Airlines.
Today, the cut-rate airline Virgin Atlantic gains a foothold on the European continent.
The plight of Italians fleeing their villages for the big city.
And Ireland's rough and rowdy national sport, hurling. Hello, and welcome to European Journal.
You've decided to make that trip to Europe. One of the most important things you look for is the cheapest, most direct flight available. Finding an inexpensive connecting flight from England to the continent used to be a problem. But flights introduced by Virgin Atlantic under an Anglo-Dutch agreement have created open skies. Connecting flights to the small but central city of Maastricht, Holland, are setting an example other European countries may follow. Walt Christophersen reports.
For Virgin Atlantic Airways, it was a case of being at the right place at the right time. Just as the airline was beginning its cut-rate service between London and New York last summer, the British and Dutch governments signed a new agreement giving their airlines almost complete freedom to establish new routes and set their own fares. Seeing a chance to help their transatlantic service, as well as take advantage of the new agreement, Virgin Atlantic started a connecting flight between London and Maastricht, a small city in southern Holland. The original price was revolutionary, about $25 one way at a time when other airlines were charging at least $100 over similar routes. The fare is now up to about $70 or 50 British pounds for either a one-way ticket or an excursion fare, but it's still a bargain.
The other airlines were up to about £60. This one was £50 return. So it very much affected my decision to come Virgin Airlines.
I was going to go by boat and come here by boat, but the £50, really changed my decision, and I'm glad I flew.
We were traveling anyway, but I think the price of the ticket was the decision to actually fly to Maastricht first in Europe.
Since the Virgin Atlantic flights began, the number of people using the airport has increased by 20%. That has stimulated tourism, lowered some airfares, and made other airlines interested in Maastricht. The regional Dutch airline NLM, which has been flying the London-Maastricht route for 15 years, created a new low excursion fare in order to be competitive. And Air France is expected to begin flying between Maastricht and Paris in a few months. Airport manager Wim Jensen says Virgin Atlantic proved that Maastricht is a viable destination.
Within 50 to 100 kilometers around Maastricht, there are more people living than in the whole of the Netherlands. The market is there. There are enough passengers, potential. It's just we have to create new connections to get them into the planes.
Although Virgin Atlantic's New York flight is making money, the Maastricht leg is just breaking even. The biggest disappointment has been the low number of people making the connection in London.
It's quite a small percentage. It's about 3% of the total traffic on the Atlantic.
And that's disappointing.
It is, but not entirely surprising because, as I say, we planned this Maastricht operation to stand on its own feet and throw whatever it could on the Atlantic.
What's in the future for Virgin Atlantic?
We're looking at a number of routes in Europe.
Between Britain and a European country other than Holland?
Yes, yeah.
Then that would be a real breakthrough.
We think so.
The Anglo-Dutch agreement has resulted in lower fares and better service between many points in Britain and Holland. It's been so successful that West Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg have since signed more liberal agreements with Britain for fear of losing customers. So the end of high European airfares may be near. The dominoes have started to fall. Walt Christophersen, European Journal, Maastricht, Holland.